Hello everyone, I'm Lee Carswell and welcome back to another video. Now if you're in the market for a fashionable SUV slash coupe, then they don't come much more on trend than this, the Mercedes GLC Coupe. But is it any good? Well, as always, let's take a look and try and find out. So what exactly is this car? Well, personally I find it a bit of an odd one, but to start with, as the name suggests, this is the GLC, but it is the coupe version, so instead of the traditional SUV look, the back has been cut to be a little bit slopey and therefore more stylish. Now, to be fair to this car, the GLC does have quite a lot to live up to, as according to Mercedes, it is the most popular SUV model they make, not necessarily the coupe, but that'll be the SUV sales as well. But anyway, what makes me think this is a bit of an odd car? Well, that is because I think it doesn't really fulfill either of its sort of criteria particularly well. You see, according to Mercedes, this car combines the sportiness of a coupe with the practical nature of an SUV, therefore making it a sports utility vehicle or an SSUV. And like I say, I don't really think it's going to be able to fulfill either of those criteria particularly well, just because it is a little bit compromised by that brief. So if we come around the back here, I'll give you a prime example of that. Dom, could you pop the boot for me, mate? Cool, thank you very much. So back here you'll see there is only 500 litres of space, which is 80 less than you'll find in the normal GLC. Now you're going to have to ignore all the crap in here, and there is still 500 litres of space, so there is quite a lot of room. But like I say, this kind of proves the point that actually this car is compromised just by the design brief it sets out to fulfil. Now, I do just want to say that it isn't just Mercedes who are guilty of this niche filling exercise, but anyway, that is enough of me moaning. So the GLC can be had with a wide variety of powertrains, and they range from a 194 horsepower diesel through petrols and a plug-in hybrid, and all the way up to a rather mental 510 horsepower AMG 63S version. So what about the car we have here? Well, as you can see, this is the GLC 300 and it is a 4MATIC model, meaning it's got all-wheel drive. Now this, the 300, is the highest powered of the normal petrol engine offerings available for the GLC. And when I say the sort of normal models, I mean obviously the AMGs sit above this, so the AMG 43 and 63, they are a much more serious proposition. Now this, the GLC 300, as well as the GLC 200, which sits below it. I reckon it's time for a quick disclaimer. So as you can see from the press release up on the screen now, apparently the GLC 200 does exist. However, after having a poke around on the internet, I cannot for the life of me find any mention of it here in the UK. So that being said, I reckon it does exist in mainland Europe, so the following bit of the video is still relevant, but just bear in mind that if you're watching in the UK, I don't think you can get your hands on the GLC 200. The petrol models, they come with something called EQ Boost. Now what is EQ Boost, you might be asking? Well, basically it is a 14 brake horsepower, 48 volt electrical system, and that system acts to help the engine when the turbo hasn't built pressure, so when you're first pulling off, and it will also turn the engine off when the car is gliding or coasting. This system will then regenerate energy under braking, and I believe that means this GLC is a mild hybrid. Now moving on to the spec, this car is an AMG Line model, and in terms of the GLC Coupe, that means this is the entry-level car, it is the bottom of the ladder. I mean, I guess that makes sense, this car is all about style, so why wouldn't they make the entry-level car an AMG of some sorts? Now, sort of ignoring my comments about this trying to fill a niche, I do understand what Mercedes are doing with this car. They're obviously targeting a demographic that sort of takes style and a decent badge above anything else. And to be fair, and taking into consideration the fact this is the base spec car, I do think it is quite a good looking motor. I know these sort of coupe SUVs do divide opinion, but I quite like it. Now this being a 2020 car, it is obviously a facelift, so that means you've got revised lights front and rear. You've also got different bumpers and a slightly different grille. And yeah, I think it's quite good. Moving down the side, being an AMG Line, you have 5-spoke 19-inch wheels. I believe you have to step up to get a different design, and I think they're slightly bigger as well if you step up. Now one design feature I do like of the GLC Coupe is the fact the rear tyres are slightly wider in profile. I don't know if you can see that on the camera here, but they are a 55 opposed to a 35, so 2 35s on the front I think and 2 55s on the rear. And I think that just helps this car look lower, sort of squat, and it sort of accentuates that rear arch. Another thing that this car does come with, if you step up to the AMG line, Premium line, I think that's what it's called, AMG Line Premium, sorry, you get some running boards and they go along the bottom, and they also help make the car look nice and low. So yeah, overall, I know it's a bit of a niche car, I know people like to hate these, but I think it's quite a good looking thing and it does serve a purpose for Mercedes. But what I want you to do is get in the comments below and tell me what you think of these SUV coupes. I know they divide opinion, so I'll be interested to know what you guys think of them.
Now just a quick mention about the space on offer in the back of the GLC Coupe. Now to be fair, I was surprised about the amount of leg and headroom on offer, as there was more than enough for me, and I am 5'11" for reference. Having said that though, I did feel like it was a little bit dark back there, and I reckon that if we put down to the fairly small window area and the sloping roof line.
So as hinted at in the previous section of this video, the GLC Coupe, the range kicks off with the AMG Line model, and that means that on the interior it is a pretty nice place to come from the factory, bar one thing, but I will touch on that slightly later on in this section. So straight away when you get in here, you'll notice this 10.25-inch display perched up here on the dash. Now I know people think these are sort of stuck on like iPads, but this, to be fair, in its new sort of landscape format opposed to a slightly boxier look, I think it looks alright. And as it is 2020, the system in here is brilliant to use. It is using the MBUX user interface, and it's very crisp to look at, very easy to navigate around, and it does respond to your touch as a sort of smartphone would. Now moving down from there, as you'd expect from a pretty expensive Mercedes, the switchgear is all very nice. It is also surrounded in this car by something called open port oak. And I'm a fan of it, to be honest. I don't tend to like the plasticky carbon look in your sort of centre dash bit, and this oak is kind of a nice finish instead. Now moving across from there, as this is at the AMG line, you don't have a massive, I think it's a 12-inch screen, and instead you have two traditional dials with a smaller screen in the middle. Personally, I quite like this. I think it is quite easy to be bamboozled and blown away by these cool digital instrument clusters, but actually in terms of ease of use and simplicity, I actually prefer these, and I think they are much easier to look at a glance and figure out what the hell's going on. I also think changing around in the settings is always a bit of a controversial one while you're driving anyway, as you are pretty heavily distracted, if I'm honest. So yeah, overall it is pretty much top marks in here, but there is that one thing I mentioned at the start of this take that isn't quite so good on the spec front. And what is that? Well, it's the fact that this car from the factory didn't come with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Dom would have had to have stepped up to the next model in the line, so that is about £3 I think. Is that the price difference? About £3 to have got those without having to pay extra. But instead he was able to pay £300 to get them. So he spent £300 and he now has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto turned on. I know £300 doesn't seem like it's not that bad, but realistically it's a 40-odd grand car, it's 2020, they're already built in, they're just turned off, and I think that was a little bit tight on Mercedes' this front.
At this point, I do just want to mention that the GLC Coupe does come with plenty of active safety tech, such as collision prevention assist and attention assist as standard. Now how does this big old thing drive? Well, before we get into that, here are some performance figures. So this model is fitted with a 258 horsepower 4-cylinder petrol engine, and that combined with the EQ boost system means that this car can go from 0 to 62 miles an hour in 6.3 seconds. It can then go on to a top speed of 150 miles an hour, and the torque, well, that's rated at 370 Newton meters.
So first, very initial impressions, we're currently getting out of a fairly off-road course car park, is that this car is pretty softly sprung, which is nice. One of the reasons that the owner of this car bought it is because his A-Class was, well, too firm for your liking, wasn't it, basically, mate?
Yep.
So this is a much softer proposition. Now one thing I will say is I've obviously not set this seat up necessarily correct for me, so I am a little bit close to the wheel. But what I was going to say is visibility is a little bit, doesn't seem brilliant if I'm honest. As with all these modern cars, the dash is really high, everything's really high. This is coming down inside your visibility as well, and it's just not the easiest place to look at which one of these cameras to look at, to be honest. But once you're underway, it's nice, relaxing, it's comfortable enough, it's nicely soft actually, because these roads aren't the best around here, and it's coping with them quite nicely. Although at 1.85 tonnes with some pretty thick sidewalls, you'd probably imagine it's going to get over most bumps without issue. Let's give it a bit up here. It's plenty quick enough actually, plenty quick enough. Now I will say I've driven plenty of cars on these roads. This car does feel quite big for them, to be honest. As you might expect, it does feel its size. We are sat quite high up, and it is a big car, but it does get a shift on. But I believe the fact you can get a shift on is reflected in the fuel economy. What do you get on it, Dob? Just under 30? No, you're 23 or something like that at the moment, the MPG.
It's barely in 20s.
Barely in the 20s. Now, I don't think the official figure is particularly brilliant either.
Right, so as normal, I'm aware that those bits of camera aren't brilliant, so I'm just going to try and summarise my thoughts now so that it makes a bit more sense. So as hinted at, the GLC seemed to be set up fairly softly, which meant it coped with the rough road surfaces quite well, which is always a bonus. Not so good though was the feeling that whilst being pretty big on the outside, this car did feel a tad small on the inside, and the visibility did suffer as a result of that. Now I will just say that this is a problem that I've encountered on quite a few modern cars, so it isn't exclusive to the GLC. Finally, whilst fairly quick in a straight line, the 9-speed auto did seem to take a little while to figure out what to do when in comfort mode. I will say though that Sport Plus seemed to sort that issue out, and whilst on the subject of the gearbox, for everyday driving I did find the 9-speed automatic just fine, and it did go about its business without fuss. I also found it quite interesting that the car did set off in second when you were in certain modes.
Here we go, foot to the floor. Here we go. Yeah. So I will say it doesn't feel quite as quick as the numbers suggest.
So just before concluding then, what does the owner think of this car? Well, after running an A250 for a few years, he wanted something comfier, and that led him to look at the GLC. He ended up buying the coupe instead of the normal GLC because on the test drive he found the normal car felt heavier in the corners, and it did also feel like a much bigger car. Interestingly, despite similar on paper performance, he reckons the GLC does feel slower off the mark than his A250, and he also isn't a fan of the brake pedal feel in his new car and reckons they aren't as strong as they should be. Finally, for the list of gripes, he isn't a big fan of the parking sensors, as he finds when it rains, they tend to think there is something there when there isn't, and they will start beeping.
So how do we conclude this video? Well, I reckon if you're even vaguely interested in the GLC Coupe, the fact that this car isn't as practical as its normal GLC brother won't be of the slightest bit of interest to you, and instead you'll be much more pleased to know that this car is luxurious and well appointed on the inside, is fast enough, and it does drive all right. You just got to watch out for that fuel economy when you're out on the road. And on the outside, more importantly, this is a stylish and desirable car to look at, and more importantly, it does have that big star on the nose. Now I know these are a slightly controversial type of car, but I can kind of accept it for what it is, and I do see it fills a niche, and actually I do quite like it, although I do say that about everything I film. But yes, I've been Blee, thank you for watching. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.